The happy family on the outside. The Connor family lived at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a picturesque New England suburb, a place where the lawns were always perfectly trimmed and neighbors made polite conversation over gleaming white fences. On the outside, their two-story colonial home, with its blue shutters and swing set in the backyard, was the picture of the American dream. Early every morning, Nathan Connor, 38, would leave for work in his navy blue pickup. He worked as a civil engineer for a respected construction firm. His days often spent managing job sites and team meetings. To those who knew him, Nathan exuded reliability. He was always quick with a friendly nod, sometimes lending spare tools or advice to neighbors tackling weekend projects. Emily Connor, 35, was a much-loved elementary school teacher at the nearby Maplewood School. Her warmth and patience were legendary among students and parents alike. Each afternoon, she bustled around the kitchen, preparing dinner while helping their 7-year-old son, Jacob, with his math homework. The house was filled with the gentle chaos of a young family, children's drawings taped to the fridge, the distant hum of the dishwasher, and the occasional joyful shriek from Jacob as he built elaborate Lego fortresses on the living room floor. Weekends were a time for togetherness. The Connors' Sundays began with blueberry pancakes and laughter around the kitchen island. In good weather, Nathan mowed the lawn while Emily tended to her small garden, Jacob racing his bike up and down the driveway. Evenings were spent grilling in the backyard, catching fireflies, and reading bedtime stories. The neighbors often remarked on how lucky the family seemed, admiring their easy affection and the apparent harmony of their home. Yet beneath these everyday moments, the sense of pride and contentment was genuine. For Emily and Nathan both believed they were building something lasting. They took comfort in the routines they'd established over a decade of marriage. Emily found meaning in her work and in nurturing her family. Nathan took pride in providing and being a steady presence in their lives. They made joint decisions about everything from house repairs to summer vacations, always putting Jacob's happiness first. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, birthdays, holidays, and vacations upstate, all smiling faces and shared memories. To any visitor, it would have been impossible to imagine trouble on the horizon. The Connors embodied the kind of suburban stability that others quietly envied, involved in their community, successful in their careers, and most importantly, united as a family. For Emily, this life was not just a source of pride, but of gratitude, a safe, loving environment for her son, a partnership built on trust, and friendships that stretched back years. As twilight settled across their street each evening, the golden glow from their living room windows seemed to promise that nothing could disturb the peace they had so carefully created. The secret uncovered. It all began on a restless Thursday evening in early spring. Emily was alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner while the last rays of sunlight filtered softly through the windows. Jacob was upstairs reading, and Nathan had retreated to the home office under the pretense of tackling paperwork. As Emily wiped down the counter, her phone vibrated with a flurry of group messages from the PTA. She set it aside, glancing distractedly at the steady red light blinking on Nathan's laptop on the side table. A familiar sight, but tonight, something about it caught her attention. Nathan almost never left his work laptop unlocked, let alone unattended. Yet tonight, in his rush to answer a phone call, he had left the screen open, his email client still visible. Emily, intending only to place a coffee mug on his desk, couldn't help glimpsing a message at the top of the inbox. The subject line was innocuous enough. Catching up soon? But the sender's name made her stomach tighten. Lisa Meadows. Her best friend since college, practically a sister and a regular fixture at their Sunday brunches. Trying to silence the uneasy feeling rising within her, Emily hesitated. But the first few lines of the email, visible in the preview pane, were unmistakably personal. Flirtatious, even. She stood frozen for a moment, torn between respect for privacy and the sudden, inexplicable dread now building inside her. Uncertain and shaken, she quietly closed the lid, reminding herself there had to be a logical explanation, refusing for the moment to let suspicion gain ground. But doubt, once awakened, would not rest. That night, long after Nathan had fallen asleep beside her, Emily lay awake in the dark. Her mind swirled with memories. A shared glance between Nathan and Lisa at last month's barbecue. The text message Lisa sent after midnight during their Vermont trip. She grew increasingly unsettled, the edges of her reality fraying with each recollection. In the days that followed, Emily found herself analyzing every detail, replaying every interaction between her husband and her best friend. She scoured her memory for signs she might have missed. A lingering look, a too long conversation, subtle shifts in body language. Her heart pounded uncomfortably whenever Lisa's name popped up on her phone or Nathan's face lit up at a notification. Unable to contain her growing anxiety, Emily began to seek subtle confirmation. She noticed how Nathan stepped out to take calls more frequently and how Lisa grew strangely distant, canceling their usual girls' coffee date at the last minute. Emily, determined not to jump to conclusions, decided she needed evidence for her own peace of mind more than anything else. One afternoon, while Nathan showered after returning from work, Emily carefully scrolled through his messages. Her hands shook as she read them. The words were unmistakable. Messages filled with secret jokes, fond recollections, subtle promises. There were photos, too, taken in familiar places. The lakeside, the porch swing, all moments hidden from Emily's view. Heart pounding, she snapped quiet photos of the conversations, unable to process the full weight of betrayal, but knowing she needed proof if this storm ever broke wide open. Shock morphed into a deep, cold ache that settled in her chest. It was not merely the violation of vows that wounded Emily, but the realization that the two people she trusted most had built a secret world of their own. And yet, despite the hurt, Emily forced herself to remain composed. She greeted Nathan with a smile and carried on her routines, as if nothing had changed. As the days blurred by, Emily refined the art of pretending. She watched Nathan and Lisa through new eyes, listening, learning, seeking the truth behind every word. The Connor home continued to radiate its familiar warmth to the outside world. But deep within, Emily's faith had faltered, replaced by a new resolve. To uncover the whole truth, and when the time came, ensure her own heart would never be so easily broken again. The wife's silence. Emily entered a new realm of existence, one defined by secrecy and restraint. No one, not Nathan, not Jacob, not even the closest of friends, could sense the storm that roiled beneath her composed exterior. Each morning, she rose before dawn, moving through the motions of daily life with a calm efficiency that bordered on mechanical. She packed Jacob's lunch, ironed Nathan's shirts, attended school meetings, and managed her classroom with the same steady patience that once made her a favorite among teachers and parents alike. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything felt unrecognizable. Her silence became a shield, a self-preservation. Emily understood that if she betrayed the tumult inside her, even for a second, the carefully constructed facade of normalcy would crack. So she forced herself to smile at neighbors, chat lightly with other mothers at school pickup, and listen attentively to her students' stories. Only in rare, unguarded moments, an impromptu question from Jacob about what love means, the scent of Nathan's cologne on an early morning shirt, did her composure tremble. Instead of seething with anger or spiraling into open confrontation, Emily grew introspective. She began jotting notes in a private journal, recording every detail. Times Nathan left the house for sudden errands, the pattern of Lisa's sporadic texts, the coldness slipping into Lisa's voice during phone calls. At night, as the house slept, Emily would review digital footprints, bank statements, email notifications, and phone logs, seeking small but telling traces. Her heartbreak took on the slow, methodical tenor of an investigation. She was no longer just a victim. She was gathering evidence, piecing together a mosaic of betrayal. This relentless attention to detail gave her a strange sense of control. Each new clue collected was both a wound and a weapon, bolstering her determination while reminding her of the stakes. She began to compile screenshots, jot down overheard comments, and log unexplained absences. She set up subtle tests, leaving a book where Nathan might see it, asking Lisa seemingly innocent questions to gauge her reaction. Through it all, Emily's answers to both were calm, never betraying the burning questions within. Social invitations became a minefield. Emily found herself orchestrating encounters she now viewed through a lens of suspicion. Where once she'd looked forward to gatherings, now her mind buzzed with analysis. At backyard barbecues and PTA meetings, she read every interaction between Nathan and Lisa with the scrutiny of a chess player studying the board. She noticed nuances she'd overlooked before. A quick glance exchanged, a stammered explanation, a joke that seemed too familiar and private. Yet her demeanor never slipped. She played the part of the loving wife, the loyal friend, even as her heart cauterized itself to dull the pain. The physical space of the house took on a new significance. The kitchen, once a place of laughter and comfort, became her strategy room. The bedroom was no longer a sanctum, but a place of uneasy silence. Even her garden became a refuge, the act of pruning roses and tending to herbs a way to work through tangled thoughts. Emily soon realized she could not afford to speak of her agony aloud, not even to those she trusted most. Confiding in friends would only add fuel to dangerous gossip, and she had Jacob to protect. Most difficult of all was keeping up the charade with her son. Emily watched Jacob for signs of stress, bad dreams, distracted silence, hesitance around his father. She went out of her way to shield him from the growing tension, ensuring his world stayed as bright and safe as possible. In private moments, she would sometimes nestle him in her arms a little longer, whispering silent promises to guard his happiness at any cost. In her silence, Emily began to formulate the outlines of a plan. She understood that sudden confrontation would serve neither justice nor healing. Patience and precision were her shields now. Armed with her quiet observations and growing collection of evidence, she was determined to not only reclaim her own dignity, but to protect her future and Jacob's. The pain had not broken her. It had transformed her resolve into something steely, focused, and fierce. The Connor home glowed as warmly as ever to the outside world, its windows golden in twilight, its air thick with the scents of dinner and freshly cut grass. But behind those walls, Emily moved like a shadow, detached, analytical, silently marshaling her forces. The world saw a devoted wife and mother. Only Emily knew the truth of her endurance and the shape of what she was planning, quietly, patiently, beneath a stifling silence. The perfect actress. For weeks, Emily became a study in restraint, blending performance and self-preservation into something almost artistic. Each day, she rose early, moving through the golden-lit house with the same purposeful grace as always. She made Jacob's breakfast with a cheerful hum, sorting blueberries into smiley faces on his pancakes, and reminded Nathan about his morning meetings in the calm, encouraging voice of a supportive partner. Every detail was carefully measured, weighed for effect, not because she wished to deceive her husband and son, but because she had no other choice. To the outside world, Emily seemed positively radiant, attentive to her husband, affectionate with her son, and as energetic as ever at work and in the neighborhood. She even found herself volunteering more, helping organize bake sales, attending PTA meetings, and chatting animatedly with neighbors over coffee as they waited for the school bus. To Nathan, there was no indication of change. He thought Emily's warm smiles and gentle laughter before bedtime were proof that all was well, that he'd avoided suspicion entirely. But beneath the surface, Emily's every move was methodical. She rehearsed her smiles in the mirror, smoothing the telltale lines that grief might leave. She corrected her own posture, adjusting her voice when it threatened to tremble. Suffering in silence, she molded herself into an image so convincing that no one, least of all Nathan or Lisa, could suspect the intensive scrutiny lurking behind her eyes. Nathan's affair, secret and reckless, continued its slow-motion devastation, but Emily choreographed her responses with deliberate calm. If Nathan came home late from an unexpected meeting, she greeted him at the door as she always had, offering a welcome home kiss and asking about his day. If he left his phone face down on the table, she resisted the urge to show any curiosity, instead complimenting him on small achievements or inquiring about his weekend plans. Their conversations remained lively and affectionate, a testament to Emily's skill at maintaining the illusion, even as she carefully catalogued every inconsistency in his stories. Emily's attention to detail extended beyond her own household. She understood that in suburban communities like theirs, perception was reality. She redoubled her efforts to strengthen the family's public image, and soon their home became a hub of neighborhood activity. She hosted book clubs, kids' playdates, and backyard barbecues, all while keeping a subtle watch over Nathan's interactions. She noted each shared glance and lingering conversation between Nathan and Lisa, careful never to betray her awareness. Social gatherings became tests of Emily's composure, a stage where she played the role of loving wife to perfection. She would catch Lisa's eye during dinner parties and offer her wine, laughing at stories from their college years. There was a subtle triumph in her magnanimity, a silent declaration that she controlled the narrative. Lisa, perhaps sensing something amiss, became more reserved around Emily, but Emily treated her with unwavering kindness, never letting suspicion creep into her tone. The daily charade was exhausting, demanding discipline at every turn. There were nights when Emily locked herself in the bathroom, pressing a towel to her mouth to stifle tears, only to emerge minutes later with her face freshly washed and a steady smile in place. She knew she was performing, but she also understood the necessity. To drop the act now was to risk losing everything at the wrong moment. Her silence required constant vigilance, but beneath it grew a seed of resolve. In small, almost imperceptible ways, Emily began to shape the perceptions of those around Nathan. She praised his dedication at work in front of neighbors, subtly reminding his colleagues of his successes and celebrating his promotions with elaborate homemade cakes. But there were gentle nudges too, hints, half-truths, and carefully placed anecdotes that over time invited quiet speculation. She would laugh about his forgetfulness. "You know Nathan, always misplacing his keys." Or mention his late nights at the office with a tone of affectionate exasperation. To the untrained ear, these remarks sounded like harmless marital banter, but in Emily's hands, they became gentle threads woven into a tapestry of doubt. She also worked to strengthen her own social network, drawing closer to friends, teachers, and neighbors whom she trusted. She rekindled old friendships, reached out to parents at Jacob's school, and made charitable contributions at local events. The effect was a kind of social insulation, a shield that would protect her as she prepared for what she knew must come next. In each interaction, she never spoke ill of Nathan or Lisa, maintaining the image of a tightly knit, enviable family. Yet it wasn't all surface charm and manipulation. Emily's moments with Jacob remained real and heartfelt. She cherished their mother-son rituals, the giggles before school, their tradition of reading together every night. She was fiercely protective of his innocence, ensuring that Jacob's world remained untouched by the invisible storm brewing within the family. Some evenings, she wondered if she was truly acting or if love and survival had become indistinguishable for her. As the days went on, Emily acclimated to her double life. She found herself growing stronger, no longer racked by the same paralyzing grief that once stole her breath in the middle of the night. With each perfect smile, with each deftly handled conversation, she reclaimed control over herself, over the story others would tell about her family, and ultimately, over the outcomes still hidden in shadows. Nathan, meanwhile, continued to move through his own carefully partitioned existence. If he noticed a change in Emily, he interpreted it as newfound contentment, a sign that their marriage had never been more stable. He joked with friends about how lucky he was, how Emily seemed to have impossibly endless patience. He confided in Lisa, usually via hurried texts, sometimes whispered exchanges stolen at company events, that things at home were normal, better than ever. Lisa, however, sometimes seemed uneasy, her laughter more brittle, her messages laced with unexpected apologies. Through it all, Emily never let herself falter. She drew on memories of her happiest moments, a walk on the beach with Nathan years ago, Jacob's birth, a snow day spent baking cookies in the kitchen, to remember what was worth fighting for. These recollections were not just nostalgia, but fuel, driving her determination to protect herself and her son from future pain. Behind closed doors, Emily continued to gather evidence. It was all part of the act. She copied correspondence, saved voicemails, even documented Nathan's absences on a discreet calendar tucked into her nightstand. She contacted a lawyer to learn her rights, careful to use a private browser session, and she met with a therapist under the pretense of work stress. Every detail was calculated, every move a rehearsal for the confrontation she believed was inevitable. In public, she and Nathan were often the center of attention. They posed for photos at school recitals, laughed together at block parties, and asked friends over for weekend brunch. Onlookers saw only unity, warmth, and effortless intimacy, a family without cracks. Only Emily knew the elaborate cost of preserving that image. With each passing week, the lines between performance and reality blurred. Emily sometimes caught herself laughing for real at Nathan's jokes, felt pangs of genuine nostalgia when he reminisced about their early years, or softened at his rare moments of vulnerability with Jacob. But the knowledge of betrayal never left her. It sharpened her instincts, honed her patience, and made her determined to see this quiet war through to the end. The act was exhausting, yes, but also empowering. In becoming the perfect actress, Emily was no longer only a victim. She was the architect of her own survival, the quiet director of a drama no one else suspected. Each day, she played her part with grace, awaiting the perfect moment when the mask could finally drop and the truth, shaped by her careful hands, would come to light. The revenge begins. There comes a moment, after the long endurance of heartbreak, when numbness transforms into resolve. For Emily Connor, that moment came not with a violent revelation, but in the hush of an ordinary evening, Jacob's soft breathing echoing from his bedroom, and Nathan humming absent-mindedly as he watched a ball game in the living room. While the house glowed with domestic serenity, Emily stood at the kitchen sink, hands trembling over a pile of dishes, and realized she was done playing the victim. Her silence had been her shield. Now, it would become her weapon. Her plan took shape in the hushed hours of late night, every step mapped out in her private journal, hidden away beneath sweaters in the back of her closet. Emily reviewed everything she had learned through months of quiet observation. Nathan's weak spots at work, his insecurities about career advancement, his reliance on his carefully maintained public persona. She remembered every careless word he dropped about his colleagues, every misplaced document he'd carelessly referenced at the dinner table, every slip in his calendar that she'd tucked away in memory. The foundation of her revenge would be subtle. No outbursts, no public scenes, merely fate working quietly and relentlessly against her husband. She started at Nathan's workplace. Emily knew the culture at his engineering firm valued loyalty, teamwork, and above all, discretion. Minor lapses in communication or dependability could snowball into major doubts about an employee's reliability. With painstaking exactness, she began to leak bits of information. Nothing overt, nothing traceable. She fed anonymous tips about a delayed report here, a forgotten inspection there, always just enough to plant a seed of doubt. Sometimes she let slip innocuous concerns in conversation with spouses of Nathan's coworkers at school functions, couching it in gentle terms. "Nathan seems so stressed lately. I hope everything at work is okay for him." Gossip, she knew, was a powerful and invisible poison. At home, she played her role to perfection. If Nathan grew frustrated over small work setbacks, an overlooked email, a colleague's odd distance, Emily responded with support, urging him to relax, reassuring him that things would work out. "You always land on your feet," she would say, patting his hand. But she made sure to gently encourage him to take on more responsibilities he was ill-prepared for, suggesting he volunteer for extra projects or office committees when she knew his schedule was already oversubscribed. "They'd really respect you for it," she smiled one evening, watching him write a list of looming deadlines. "You're the only one who can handle it all." Meanwhile, she nurtured her own relationships in the community with purposeful intent. Emily had always been well-liked, but now she became indispensable. The first to sign up for charity events, the organizing force behind school fundraisers, the friend who remembered birthdays and anniversaries. She listened keenly for hints of workplace politics, catching the nuances in conversations at the coffee shop, piecing together patterns from casual remarks. And always, behind every interaction, she was gathering leverage. Emily discovered that the partner Nathan most relied upon had a history of frustration with missed communications and would often vent, offhand, about people who always promised the world and then forget the details. Emily made sure such frustrations echoed in the right ears. A lost file, a digital accident, was quietly arranged by Emily sending a USB Nathan had left at home for Jacob's school project to the office, knowing it contained nothing of value, but could be mistaken for misplaced work files. A small thing, but when suspicion has roots, even trivial mistakes look incriminating. She also grew more strategic in her timing. Emily made sure to schedule family events, doctor's appointments, or surprise dinners on days she knew Nathan had work deadlines, always acting regretful for the conflict, but never relenting on the importance of family time, thus forcing him into awkward and stressful balancing acts. He'd return from the office testy and distracted, blaming the chaos of home for his recent missteps, only to find Emily warm and forgiving. "I know you're under pressure," she cooed, "but we all need you here too." Her campaign wasn't just professional, it was personal, weaving its way into Nathan's social standing. She knew, from her own experience, how tightly knit and gossipy their suburban circle could be. Emily hosted more social events, but made sure Nathan was often the butt of gentle jokes, stories about his forgetfulness, his late arrivals, his harmless obliviousness to household chores. Always with a laugh, always with warmth, never biting enough to appear malicious, but just enough to invite head-shaking sympathy or the subtle withdrawal of trust. Over time, Nathan noticed he wasn't invited to quite as many poker nights or impromptu barbecues. "It's probably just work," he tried to tell himself. At the same time, she turned her attention to Lisa. Emily was never cruel nor overt. Instead, she adopted a subtly distant but scrupulously polite tone in every interaction. She included Lisa in group texts, but left her out of private coffee dates. She handed off invitations for Jacob's birthday through mutual friends, never directly. Lisa, keenly sensitive to shifts in social terrain, began to feel the chill, but could never confront Emily without risking exposure. The psychological effects were cumulative, a sense of unease, a constant fear of secrets slipping into daylight. Emily also reinforced her public image as a devoted mother, always active at Jacob's school activities, helping with science fairs, cheering on at Little League games. She turned potential allies into advocates, making sure that if questions ever arose about parenting or stability, her reputation would stand beyond reproach. In subtle ways, she even made sure Jacob's teachers knew about Nathan's recent distractions at home, always phrased as sympathy for her hardworking husband. "He means well, he's just overwhelmed with work. I try to keep Jacob on track." All the while, Emily kept meticulous records. Every odd text, every moment of suspicion, every instance of Nathan's unreliable behavior was cataloged and, where possible, documented. She met with a discreet attorney, never using the family computer, arming herself with knowledge of her rights and the best strategies to secure Jacob's future. In therapy sessions, she unpacked her long-term goals, strengthening both her resolution and her composure. Nathan, for his part, remained baffled as his carefully curated world began to unravel at the edges. His superiors questioned his commitment, colleagues grew hesitant in their trust, and at home, his sense of control steadily eroded, even as his wife radiated the same affectionate steadfastness that had always defined her. The more he leaned on her for support, the more he unwittingly aided her silent campaign. In the quiet hours before dawn, Emily would sit at the edge of her bed, reviewing her progress and sketching out next steps. She hated the need for such subterfuge, hated the lies, the manipulation, but she reminded herself she was fighting not only for vindication, but for her son's future. If she sometimes felt regret for Nathan, it was fleeting, quickly swept away by memories of betrayal and humiliation. She understood now that her silence was not weakness, but the prologue to her methodical revenge. By the beginning of summer, cracks were visible. From the missed promotions at Nathan's firm to the wary distance between him and their closest friends, Emily had become, to everyone watching, the steadfast wife holding her family together through an inexplicably turbulent time. No one suspected that she was the silent architect of Nathan's unraveling, the mastermind of a campaign that would soon strip him of everything he'd once taken for granted. And Emily, watchful, patient, and wholly in control, was only just beginning. A battle of wits between two women. From the outside, nothing seemed to have changed. The Connors and their circle of friends continued their routines of backyard barbecues, school functions, and cheerful Sunday brunches. But beneath this social surface, an invisible tension wound tighter with every passing day. A silent, relentless game between two women who once called each other sister, but now communicated only through veiled glances and skillful subtext. Emily had long since mastered her outward performance, but with Lisa, the stakes were different. Their friendship spanned over a decade, colored by shared memories of late-night study sessions, inside jokes only they laughed at, and bittersweet college heartbreaks. In quieter days, they'd supported each other through everything from family illnesses to career changes. Now, those years manifested as both ammunition and armor. Both understood how much the other stood to lose or to reveal. The first real clash did not happen in words. It began in silences. One afternoon, after a PTA planning session, Emily lingered beside the refreshment table while Lisa gathered her things. Their conversation was like a chess match played with smiles. Emily offered Lisa a cookie, her tone feather light. "I know these are your favorite, aren't they?" Lisa hesitated, almost imperceptibly, before accepting the treat. Their eyes met, a fraction longer than politeness called for, and something unspoken flickered between them. Emily wondered if Lisa heard the accusation buried beneath her warmth, just as Emily heard the tremor in Lisa's grateful reply. Over time, these brief encounters accrued layers of tension, a subtle war of microaggressions and coded remarks. At a neighbor's birthday dinner, Lisa made a harmless joke about Emily's organizational flair, calling her Maplewood's personal event planner. Emily only smiled, but in her reply, "It comes from years of cleaning up after my boys and their messes." She let her voice drop an octave, eyes locked on Lisa. It was a tiny retort, easily overlooked by the rest of the table, but both women felt it hang in the air. The knife had been passed back and forth. Increasingly, Emily found herself watching Lisa from across crowded rooms, analyzing her body language down to every nervous gesture. She noticed how Lisa grew quieter in groups, her laughter now brittle and quick, her glances at Nathan more fleeting than before. But when Emily was near, Lisa's posture stiffened, her words measured. It was as if they were performing for each other. Lisa wanting to seem innocent, Emily to appear above suspicion. Each woman determined not to yield even a single step. The battle soon extended to their mutual friends. In small gatherings, Emily sowed seeds of doubt about Lisa's reliability, all through innocent-seeming anecdotes. "Lisa's been so busy lately, I barely see her," she'd say with a lilt, as if genuinely concerned. When opportunities arose, she praised Lisa's generosity in the past, but subtly reminded others of her growing distance. Meanwhile, Lisa countered in her own way, reaching out to friends for advice, reminiscing about old times with Emily, and offering lavish compliments in group texts that felt increasingly hollow to those who paid attention. The circle began shifting, alliances quietly forming and dissolving as the two women maneuvered for social footing. At school events, their performances became more elaborate. During Maplewood's annual spring fair, Emily volunteered to coordinate the silent auction. She worked tirelessly, and on the day of the fair, every detail was perfect. Lisa, assigned to supervise the arts and crafts table, arrived with bags under her eyes and a forced smile. When Emily stopped by the table to check on supplies, she complimented Lisa's creativity, loud enough for others to hear, but followed up quietly. "You always did have a knack for bringing out the best in others, Lisa." The compliment shimmered on the surface but cut beneath, alluding to Lisa's role as confidant, and now, betrayer. In these public moments, Lisa's defenses showed cracks. She would sometimes stammer, drop supplies, or misplace her phone. Emily noticed every lapse, storing the details away for possible future use. If Lisa lingered too long near Nathan, Emily would glide over and thread her arm through his, her smile genuine for the crowd, but cold as glass for Lisa. These subtle interventions shifted the dynamic. Lisa, once so welcome in Emily's home, now needed to gauge every movement for risk of exposure or rebuff. Ironically, both women clung to the routines of their old friendship, using them as camouflage. Emily still tagged Lisa in social media posts about community events and sent her thinking of you texts on rainy days. Lisa tried to reciprocate with gifts for Jacob or forwarding funny memes she thought Emily might appreciate. But each interaction read like a code, both minds racing to decipher subtext while maintaining perfect composure. They both knew there were no innocents left in this game, only survivors. Privately, Emily found herself rehearsing possible confrontations. She would stand before the bathroom mirror late at night, practicing her tone. Gentle, incredulous, furious, or heartbreakingly calm. She imagined scenarios where she might corner Lisa alone, demand the truth at last, unleash the torrent of questions and accusations she'd suppressed for so long. But every time, she stopped short of action. recognizing that real victory required patience and poise, not emotional outbursts. Revenge, to Emily, had become a matter of strategy. Though the fight was unspoken, it was draining. Emily could feel the toll in the tension at her shoulders, the headaches that lingered well into evenings, her irritability with Jacob over small things. Yet she pressed on, channeling her exhaustion into greater attention to detail. She tripled her efforts at work, expanded her community involvement, and brought new structure to her home life, all to signal to the world, and herself, that she was not unraveling. In contrast, Lisa seemed less steady. Her attendance at social events grew sporadic. She missed a deadline for the school newsletter. Friends murmured about her distraction, her not-quite-herself persona. Nathan, caught in the middle and oblivious to the true scale of the storm, noticed only the growing awkwardness between the women. He would privately ask Emily if Lisa was upset about something, or if there had been a misunderstanding. Emily assured him with a wry smile and a pat on the hand. "Just women stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." The more he tried to smooth things over with Lisa, the more obvious his discomfort became. Lisa, for her part, gave Nathan space, wary of attracting renewed suspicion. By early summer, the duel had reached its peak. Rumors flickered through the neighborhood, none precise, but enough to breed wariness. Emily, always in control, continued to shape the narrative, ensuring her family's name remained unsullied while Lisa's reputation began to fray at the edges. Through it all, neither woman broke public composure, but behind every exchange lay the echoes of all that had been lost, and the reckoning still to come. For in this chess match of betrayals and facades, victory would not go to the most cunning, but to the one who wielded patience, resilience, and control over her own pain. Emily's silence had been her strength, but her battle of wits with Lisa would prove just how far she was willing to go for the last word. Family court. When Emily made the decision to file for divorce, the air in the Connor home seemed to change overnight. Though Nathan remained oblivious in the early days, preoccupied by mounting work woes and social ripples he didn't understand, Emily was already in motion. She moved with intentional calm, from early correspondence with her attorney to the careful gathering of documents and digital evidence she'd hidden away for months. Every step in her strategy was designed to be decisive, quiet, and undeniable. She waited until Jacob was asleep and the house was cloaked in early spring darkness before approaching Nathan. There would be no angry shouting, no emotional scenes, just the cold facts, emails, text chains, photos. Emily laid out her evidence in a manila folder and set it on the dining table, her face composed, her voice level. "I know everything, Nathan," she said. Her husband's confusion splintered quickly into panic as he thumbed through the pages, page after page of his own ruin, printed in black and white, punctuated by the unmistakable name, Lisa Meadows. He was caught unprepared. The months he'd spent cultivating secrecy had, ironically, made him sloppy. He racked his brain for a plausible explanation, an apology, an escape route. But Emily had anticipated every angle. "This isn't just about you and me," she added. "It's about Jacob, about what kind of family he deserves." Within a week, the Connor neighborhood buzzed with rumors as papers were quietly but unmistakably served. The shockwaves radiated out, not through public scandal, but through the discreet conversations among neighbors and schoolteachers who sensed something had shifted behind the Connors' manicured hedges. The legal arena, Emily had selected her attorney carefully. A meticulous, soft-spoken woman with a reputation for preparedness and tenacity in family court. The divorce proceedings began with mediation, as required, but there was little room for compromise. Early on, Emily made her intentions clear. She would seek primary custody of Jacob, and she would be prepared to lay bare the truth about Nathan's affair, if necessary. The courtroom itself was a study in contradiction. A bland municipal building, utilitarian and cold, yet thick with private dramas unfolding in hushed voices and behind nervous glances. Emily appeared for every session polished but understated, hair pulled back, simple pearl earrings, a file of well-organized evidence tucked under one arm. Nathan, in contrast, looked haggard, his eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. The confident, outgoing man who had been at the center of block parties and office meetings was now nervous and out of his depth. The early hearings were dominated by paperwork, statements of assets, schedules, affidavits describing Jacob's routines. Emily's evidence was comprehensive. She provided the judge with time-stamped correspondence, behavioral patterns, and even records showing how Nathan's late nights at work aligned perfectly with Lisa's suspicious emergencies. She included character references from colleagues, parents at Jacob's school, and a discreet but damning affidavit from a longtime neighbor who had witnessed Nathan in Lisa's company more than once. Testimonies and turning points. During testimony, Emily was poised and measured. She described, without malice, the gradual change in Nathan's behavior, the absences, the lies, the growing distance. She focused on Jacob, his needs, his sensitivity, how she'd worked to keep his daily life safe and intact. Her legal team called witnesses with surgical precision. Teachers from Maplewood Elementary spoke of Emily's devotion. The way she never missed a parent conference, how Jacob arrived at school well-fed and prepared, even during the most turbulent months. Neighbors described Emily's quiet strength, her continued role organizing community events despite her private turmoil. Nathan, pressed to respond, struggled to defend himself. He stammered through explanations, often contradicting himself or confusing dates. When questioned about the affair, he looked away, mumbling half-hearted denials that fell apart as Lisa's messages, playful, then intimate, then angry, as the relationship soured, were read into the official record. Lisa herself was not present in court but was a lingering ghost in every testimony, her absence speaking almost as loudly as her digital footprints. The judge listened intently, taking notes on everything from Jacob's favorite after-school activities to Emily's plans for continued stability. Emily's attorney, always prepared, brought in expert witnesses. A child psychologist who had met privately with Jacob and attested to his secure, loving home with Emily. A financial advisor who explained in clear terms that Emily's careful management of the household accounts would ensure continuity during and after the transition. The courtroom scenes were never dramatic in the cinematic sense. There was no gasping, no raised voices. Instead, tension hung thick in the sterile air. Every word, every piece of paper, built the case for a new beginning. Jacob in the middle. Emily was fiercely protective of her son's privacy throughout. When required, Jacob's input was limited. A private conversation with a child advocate, questions about his comfort, his school, his time, with each parent. Jacob, small and serious for his age, confided that he was happiest in his own room, doing homework with his mom, and loved visits to the park. In a child's simple clarity, he revealed everything the court needed to hear. The breaking point. Nathan attempted one desperate pivot after another. He insisted on his bond with Jacob, insisting that late work nights were meant to provide for the family, not destroy it. But his efforts were undercut as more and more inconsistencies surfaced. His attorney, noting the mounting tide of evidence and the growing sympathy for Emily, shifted gears, now fighting to secure only generous visitation and preserve what shreds of Nathan's reputation could be salvaged. Meanwhile, Lisa, once the vivid presence on the periphery, vanished. She quietly withdrew from the Connors' social circle, stopped returning Nathan's increasingly panicked calls, and failed to make an appearance at any hearing. The isolation Nathan had worked so hard to avoid became inescapable. The final judgment. After a succession of hearings and depositions, the judge delivered the verdict in a quiet morning session. Emily was granted primary physical and legal custody of Jacob, as well as the family home. Nathan received scheduled, supervised visitation and was ordered to participate in counseling before the court would consider unsupervised time. The official reasoning was clear in the public record. The paramount need for the child's stability and well-being, the clear evidence of parental betrayal and unreliability, and the overwhelming support for Emily among those closest to the case. As Emily stepped out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, months of held breath finally released from her chest. Reporters were absent, but friends lingered quietly at the edge of the parking lot, ready to offer comfort. Emily did not gloat, nor did she look back at Nathan, who remained behind, dazed and alone. Her journey was not one of triumph over another, but of reclaiming dignity and security for herself and her son. The family court, sterile, bureaucratic, and often impersonal, became the stage for Emily's true victory. Not the demolition of Nathan, but the construction of a safer, healthier future for Jacob, and a hard-won peace for herself. The husband loses everything. After the judge rendered the final verdict, a stark silence fell over Nathan's world, so absolute and foreign it left him breathless. There was no dramatic slam of the gavel, no public shaming, no angry mob. Instead, the fallout arrived in quiet increments, each day stripping away a certainty he'd once taken for granted. It was only as he packed his belongings into plain brown boxes, shirts, tools, childhood photos of Jacob, that the truth settled in. He had lost everything. At first, Nathan attempted to preserve routine, hoping that if he kept moving as though nothing had changed, the world might realign itself beneath his feet. He drove to work as usual, nodding politely to neighbors who avoided his gaze. The house, now echoing and half empty, felt more like an impersonal hotel room than a home. With every creak of the floorboards, every dust mote suspended in the sunlight, the absence of Emily and Jacob pressed in from all sides. The news of the divorce rippled swiftly through their community and soon through the ranks of Nathan's company. No matter how well Emily had shielded the details, rumors found their way into whispered corners of the break room and sidelong glances in conference calls. Nathan's colleagues, once easygoing accomplices in after-hours drinks and banter, grew formal, even wary around him. They speculated in hushed tones about the allegations, his long absences, his ties to Lisa. Work offers dried up, committee invitations were declined or given to others. As the weeks marched on, Nathan's once bright career lost its momentum. The weight of professional mistrust was matched only by the void at home. The family house, awarded to Emily and Jacob, stood as a symbol of everything he'd forfeited. Nathan now rented a drab two-bedroom apartment across town, with beige walls and cheap blinds that clattered in the night wind. He spent evenings microwaving single-serve dinners, the television chattering pointlessly in the background, his phone buzzing only with reminders and the occasional impersonal text from a stunned acquaintance. Supervised visits with Jacob became both a lifeline and a reminder of everything that had slipped from Nathan's grasp. The court orders demanded a social worker's presence for each scheduled visit. In the sterile, carefully monitored environments, a municipal playroom, a corner of the public library, Nathan could see the strain in his son's eyes. Jacob hugged him politely, accepted his attempts at small talk, but everything between them felt filtered and rehearsed. "I miss you, Dad," Jacob would offer quietly, coloring the edges of a worksheet. "I know, buddy. I miss you too," Nathan would reply, swallowing against the ache in his throat. He tried to bridge the distance with board games and funny voices, but every activity carried the weight of the observer sitting in the corner, scribbling notes. Nathan tried to apologize for things Jacob couldn't possibly understand, but the words caught in his stilted heart. "I wish things could be different, little man. I really do." What made the loss sharper was Lisa's disappearance. For months, Nathan had convinced himself that her presence was constant, a forbidden comfort that could be relied on if everything else collapsed. But after Emily's revelations, things between them fizzled rapidly. Lisa returned his texts with curt responses, then not at all. Calls went straight to voicemail. When Nathan showed up at her bungalow unannounced, she wouldn't come to the door. He learned, through mutual acquaintances, that Lisa had taken a leave of absence from her job and was visiting family out of state. Whatever dreams Nathan had about building something with her, about piecing together a new life from the ashes, crumbled under the weight of mutual shame. Lisa's abrupt withdrawal felt like another betrayal, a reversal of the affection and camaraderie that had once seemed so natural. Nathan wanted to hate her, to blame her for her role in everything, but each time he indulged the thought, he was forced to confront the scope of his own mistakes, the rationalizations, the selfishness, the lies that tore apart the only family he had ever wanted. As the repercussions settled in, something in Nathan began to unravel. He grew unkempt, his beard unchecked, his appetites fading. Conversations with old friends were stilted affairs, filled with apologies and reassurances. Some friends dropped away entirely, unsure of how to manage the discomfort of it all. Others tried to help, but Nathan, embarrassed and hollowed out, pushed them aside. He found himself replaying memories, not for comfort, but as a kind of penance. The image of Emily, sturdy and serene, reading to Jacob in the golden light of late afternoon, of Jacob's eager face on Christmas morning, of dinners shared in that blue-shuttered home, laughter rising to the ceiling. Every recollection was a blade, reminding him of what he had destroyed with 1,000 small betrayals. There were real, material consequences, too. Legal fees mounted. Nathan's credit, already strained by the costs of moving, therapy, court-ordered and voluntary, and private investigators, took a nosedive. He sorted through court-mandated paperwork with a sense of hopeless futility. Expense ledgers, custody agreements, visitation schedules. The proceedings felt endless, draining whatever reserves of strength or hope he'd managed to keep. There were nights he left unopened bills in a pile near the door, unable to face them. The greatest loss remained his role as a father. Once the anchor of Jacob's world, Nathan was now little more than a periodic visitor. He started keeping a diary of their brief encounters, Jacob's newest favorite animal, a story he'd written for school, the way he wrinkled his nose at cafeteria green beans. Nathan clung to these scraps, desperate to mark the passing of his son's childhood before it slipped away entirely. Yet with each supervised goodbye, he felt his place diminishing, the rituals of fatherhood receding into the background noise of Jacob's new life. In rare moments of clarity, Nathan considered reaching out to Emily, not for forgiveness, but for clarity. He drafted letters he never sent, filled with apologies, explanations, and regret. He acknowledged her strength, her relentless devotion to Jacob, the quiet discipline with which she had rebuilt their lives. But shame stopped him. He knew there was nothing he could offer that would mend what had been broken, nothing that would undo the choices he'd made. Time passed. Summer gave way to the churn of autumn, and Nathan was left watching his own life from the outside. He saw Emily at a school event once, surrounded by other parents, her smile soft but clear. Jacob's hand nestled confidently in hers. Nathan stood at a distance, unseen, grief and awe mingling in the hollow beneath his ribs. At last, Nathan came face to face with the finality of his loss. Not a single catastrophic blow, but an accumulation of silences, absences, and small defeats that left him emptied out and remorseful. There would be no redemption, at least not yet, and no return to the home he had forsaken. Left only with memories and consequences, Nathan began the slow, painful process of reckoning with all he had lost. Emily's liberation. The first true morning of Emily's new life had nothing dramatic about it. There was no swelling soundtrack, no burst of celebratory confetti, only the gentle sunbeam filtering through lace curtains, the lightest hush of spring birdsong, and the warm, earthy aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Emily opened her eyes to the sound of Jacob's laughter, now unburdened by tension, ringing down the hallway as he raced his toy cars along the floor. For the first time in years, she inhaled and felt her chest expand fully. No invisible hands tightening around her ribcage, no suppressed pain constricting her breath. Freedom, she realized, was profoundly quiet. Days that used to feel heavy and performative unfolded now with new possibility. At breakfast, Emily didn't have to calculate her words or anticipate Nathan's moods. Gone were the small domestic wars, the glances, the second-guessings, and in their place, a softer, organic rhythm emerged. Jacob babbled about school and soccer and space aliens, and Emily let herself meet his gaze, listening with all the presence she could muster. Each smile was real, each embrace comforting and warm. After the bitterness of the past year, Emily ached for healing as much as she hungered for revenge. She allowed herself time to grieve, not only for the marriage, but for the person she'd been in its last suffocating chapters. She carried regret naturally, but refused to let it define her. Instead, each day became an act of gentle self-forgiveness. In the earliest mornings and latest nights, Emily journaled, her pen moving slowly over old wounds and new hopes. She wrote letters to her younger self, forgiving her choices and honoring her resilience. With Nathan gone, so too was the web of tight control that had dictated her days. Emily rediscovered the small pleasures she'd once loved, running her hands through the earth in her garden, sketching wildflowers in her notepad, listening to music she'd always kept low when Nathan was around. Even simple things, cooking dinner just the way she liked, introducing Jacob to new flavors, singing aloud with the radio while driving to the farmer's market, took on a heightened significance. These were rituals of reclamation, evidence that she was still there beneath the layers of sorrow. Friendships, too, blossomed in the aftermath. Though Emily was careful to keep her private pain from becoming neighborhood gossip, she grew closer to a few trusted friends, those who had quietly supported her or shown up with casseroles and open arms when the court case became public. They walked together in the evenings, sharing stories and silent commiseration, forging a sisterhood born not out of scandal, but shared endurance. Through these connections, Emily rebuilt the scaffolding of her social life, not around Nathan or Lisa, but around her own values and hard-won self-respect. She was equally protective of Jacob's emotional recovery. Emily retained his routines, but infused them with new warmth and meaning. Bedtimes became sacred, a time for whispered confidences and adventure stories. Weekends were spent hiking in state parks or baking lopsided cookies in their sunlit kitchen, laughter mingling with the scent of vanilla. She paid close attention to Jacob's shifting moods, ensuring he never felt the loss as a personal flaw or punishment. They attended family therapy, working together to articulate feelings and reshape their small family's core. Financial independence emerged slowly but steadily. Emily navigated the practicalities of single motherhood with careful diligence. Bills, repairs, insurance, savings plans. She returned to her teaching with renewed focus, not merely as a means of survival, but as a source of pride and a daily reminder of her capabilities. Her work at Maplewood Elementary flourished. Colleagues and parents noticed a new, unguarded lightness to her laughter. Children gravitated to her classroom, sensing the depth of her care. There were moments, unexpected and sometimes raw, when the old selves resurfaced. Sometimes at traffic lights or in line at the grocery store, Emily would feel the ache of memory or the prickle of familiar shame. Sometimes the echo of Nathan's voice crept in. His criticisms whispered old doubts through her mind. In those moments, Emily stopped, took a deep breath, and let them pass, reminding herself that healing was not about erasing scars, but accepting them as proof of survival. Legal closure helped, but the true liberation was internal. Emily allowed herself to dream again, to plan without checking over her shoulder. She savored the simple, fierce thrill of self-determination, the notion that her life was hers to shape. She signed up for painting classes, having always envied artists' boldness. She booked a mother-son weekend trip to Cape Cod, delighting in the smell of salty air and the cool tang of ice cream on the boardwalk. She bought herself a small blue bike, reclaiming the freedom of her childhood rides. Occasionally, Emily encountered Nathan in the periphery of her world. A brief, awkward exchange at a school function, or a glimpse of his hunched figure exiting a grocery store. Each time, she felt a pang for the man she once loved, the family they once were. But the sting faded quickly, replaced by compassion. Not for the person who'd betrayed her, but for herself, for how bravely she had loved. Her sense of self-worth was rekindled not by victory over Nathan or vengeance on Lisa, but in learning to love herself again. She realized she had stayed strong not because she had to, but because that was her way forward. Strength, she found, was not the absence of pain, but the ability to move through it. As spring bled softly into summer, Emily began to feel hope rising in her chest. The home that had felt haunted was now alive with Jacob's energy and her own newfound agency. One evening, as sunlight streamed through the windows and Jacob read aloud from his favorite comic, Emily sat on the porch swing, sketchbook on her knees, smiling into the twilight. Freedom, she understood, was rarely won in a single triumphant leap, but gained day by day in small, conscious acts of courage. Each morning she woke, she chose herself. Each night, she tucked Jacob in, knowing their world was, at last, honest and safe. Emily could not erase all that had happened, but as she gazed out into the dusk, her heart steady, her purpose clear, she knew she was whole again, stitched together not by bitterness, but by acceptance and the enduring power of self-love. Liberation, she realized, was not an ending, but the sweetest, bravest beginning. Consequences and forgiveness. In the months after the court's verdict and the dissolution of the Connor marriage, the quiet town of Maplewood settled into a new rhythm, even as echoes of the scandal drifted through its cul-de-sacs. Weeks faded into months, and the intense scrutiny on Emily, Nathan, and Jacob gradually dissolved into polite silence and cautious curiosity. Yet within each member of the former family, and among those whose lives had been touched by the fallout, the consequences lingered, some visible, others buried deep beneath the surface. For Nathan, life did not simply resume. It evolved around absence. The routine he had once taken for granted was now pared down to essentials. In the mornings, he woke in his small apartment to the sound of traffic rather than Jacob's footsteps in the hallway. He often sat with his coffee cooling in his hands, facing the realization that his son's drawings no longer adorned his fridge, that the spontaneous laughter and bustle of family life had been replaced by a silence made heavier by regret. Every few weekends, Nathan prepared for his supervised visits with Jacob. He meticulously planned activities, hoping to forge connection through crafts, picnics, or building model airplanes together. But Jacob, wise beyond his years in the wake of so much change, approached these visits with wary politeness. Nathan ached to bridge the growing distance, sometimes slipping into apology, other times attempting to be the fun dad, desperate to reclaim his place in his son's heart. The social worker's presence as a silent observer only deepened the sense of artificiality. Professionally, Nathan struggled as well. The rumors, while never openly discussed, had colored his relationships at work. Once the rising star of his engineering firm, he was now a cautionary tale whispered about in closed-door meetings. He received fewer invitations to team projects and lost the camaraderie that once defined his daily life. His motivation, like his social circle, eroded bit by bit. Though he tried to maintain dignity, the mounting financial pressures and isolation wore him thin. Some evenings he would dial Lisa's number, his thumb hovering over the call button, but he always stopped short, haunted by the knowledge that their connection had collapsed under the same weight as his marriage. Lisa herself had disappeared from their community without fanfare. Some neighbors gossiped that she had transferred to a new branch or gone back to school out of state. Others believed she was laying low, hoping the scandal would pass. Emily, for her part, felt a mix of emotions toward Lisa. Anger, certainly, but also a distant sense of mourning for the friend she'd lost to betrayal. Sometimes Emily found herself drafting unsent letters, missives that began as confrontations, only to soften into questions about the years of laughter and support that had preceded the hurt. Was it possible, she wondered, to separate the friend she once knew from the woman who'd helped unravel her home? Emily focused on moving forward. Day by day, the sharp pain of betrayal dulled. Routine and purpose filled the empty spaces. She poured energy into her teaching, her garden, and above all, into Jacob's well-being. Together, they marked new milestones. Jacob's first soccer goal, a weekend camping trip filled with laughter around a crackling fire. Art projects proudly taped to the kitchen wall. Emily watched her son gain confidence again, saw the light return to his eyes, and was reminded that healing, while messy and slow, was stubbornly possible. Still, at night, questions sometimes surfaced in Emily's mind. Had she done enough to protect Jacob? Would the wounds Nathan inflicted ever truly fade? Could she forgive, if not forget, the betrayals that had divided her family? Forgiveness became both a goal and a struggle. One bright Sunday, while tending to her roses, Emily realized the bitterness she carried served no one, least of all herself. The consequences of Nathan and Lisa's actions were real and lasting, but so too was the possibility of release. That afternoon, she called her therapist and spoke, honestly and at length, about her desire to move beyond the narrative of victimhood. Forgiveness, the therapist counseled, was not about granting absolution or erasing wrongdoing. It was about choosing to free herself from the tight grip of resentment. Emily began, quietly, to practice small acts of forgiveness. When Nathan fumbled at a school function, offering an awkward wave from across the parking lot, she nodded back, no longer burdened by the compulsion to wound him with her own coldness. When Jacob confided that he missed his dad, Emily listened without bitterness, reassuring her son that he never had to choose sides. With each repetition, letting go became just a bit easier. Nathan, too, faced the long road toward self-forgiveness. There were many nights when guilt left him restless, revisiting the choices that had upended his life and those he loved. Over time, however, he realized that remorse alone would not heal anyone. Therapy, though difficult at first, helped him recognize his own patterns, his fear of vulnerability, his careless entitlement, and the ways his own wounds had contributed to wounding others. He wrote letters to Emily and to Jacob, most of which he never sent, but some he did. In them, he took responsibility for his actions without pleading for reconciliation, choosing instead to offer the only thing left in his control: accountability. As summer edged into fall, the Connors found themselves on the other side of the storm. The consequences of those turbulent years were neither erased nor exploited. They simply became part of the family's new story. Jacob, dear and resilient, adapted in his own way. He learned truths about disappointment and boundaries, but also about trust, honesty, and unconditional love. There were rough days and setbacks, but also laughter and tenderness. Emily and Nathan, united only now by Jacob's needs, discovered an awkward peace in their co-parenting relationship, recognizing in each other the shared weight and privilege of raising their son. Forgiveness, Emily came to realize, was not an act to be performed and then forgotten. It was a practice, a steady loosening of the knots left behind by anger and betrayal. It showed itself in ordinary gestures, sharing photos from Jacob's birthday, checking in during flu season, offering encouragement before a school recital. The past could not be changed, but its grip could be weakened by the quiet, repetitive choice to respond with decency. Looking back, Emily sometimes marveled at the path she had survived. There would always be scars. Some memories would never fully lose their sting, but beneath them lived a new strength and compassion. Toward herself, toward Nathan, even toward Lisa, somewhere out in the world, wrestling with her own demons. The ending of the marriage was not truly an ending at all, but a new season, defined not by what had been lost, but by what could yet be reclaimed: peace, purpose, and the stubborn sunlight of forgiveness.